All right, guys. Star Wars is for kids. So give me your reaction to the finale of the Book of Boba Fett, but you have to do it in the spirit of the 12-year-old you. So, Pete, you go first.
Yeah, it was totally awesome. There was a monster. There was fighting. There was everything Star Wars I ever wanted to see in 1 hour. It was great. I loved it.
All
That's
right.
12-year-old me, though.
That's
Just
12-year-old.
sure.
All right. What about you, Lucas, the Reverend himself? Go for it.
Oh my gosh! That is that's basically what 12-year-old me would have. I would have just been running around the house, like just bouncing off the walls, especially when Boba came in on the Rancor. Like I had an Akita, which is this huge dog for the longest time, and I would have immediately tried to like hop on him, and we would have been riding around the house just destroying everything. It was amazing.
What do you do? That oh my gosh thing was what 46-year-old me was doing at the end of it yesterday. So, all right, Josh, give us your best reaction as 12-year-old you.
Did you guys see the Rancor? Did you guys see the blaster fight? Did you guys see the two robots? It was absolutely insane. My mind is blown. Oh my gosh. Like Star Wars has been incredible, but like this just like took it to a whole nother level and gave me something that I never even thought was possible. And now it's like, where does it even go from here? All these like things in the mid-credit scene, like I just can't stop freaking out. And like, is there going to be another season? I have no idea. What did you guys think?
It's true. All of it.
What is the name of the Porg on the Millennium Falcon?
Force is strong in my family.
What do you think his name is? It's a big moment.
I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
Maybe Turbis?
Do or do not. There is no try.
Turbis? Pablo, if you're listening to this live stream, that Porg's name is now Turbis. It's a good Star Wars name.
We're not done yet.
These guys recorded an awesome podcast called Tatooine Sons. Everybody listen to it.
Welcome to Tatooine Sons, the only fan podcast to name an official Star Wars creature and to be endorsed by the writer and director of The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson. We believe that pop culture is the mythology of this generation, that there is a story, it is written on our souls, and that these myths speak to that story. And that is why I am honored to be joined this week by three amazing gentlemen to talk about the finale of the Book of Boba Fett. First, we have Pete Fletzer. He's a freelance writer. He was best known for his work in the mid-90s for Lucasfilm and Top Star Wars Galaxy and Star Wars Insider magazines. He was actually discovered by Steve Sansweet of Rancho Obi-Wan fame, and he wrote content about toys and collectibles and unique fan stories and New York area Star Wars movie premiere articles. He has authored almost 200 Star Wars questions for the amazing science fiction and horror trivia game. And then in the early 2000s, Pete stepped away from writing. He disappeared from the public eye, other than issuing the occasional blog post. In 2019, he released his mammoth, full-length fan fiction novelization of The Phantom Menace called Duel of the Fates, which we talk a little bit about on this episode. He's an accomplished voiceover artist, and Pete can be heard weekly on his podcasts called Around the Galaxy and Disturbances in the Force and the other things that he's doing on that network. Our second guest is Lucas Pinckard. Over the last 15 years, he spent time as a touring musician and an evangelist and an international ministry, and he's now the pastor of First Baptist Church Lake, Dallas, and the host of The Reverend and the Reprobate podcast. Lucas and I have gotten to know each other really well. I get to go out and visit him in a couple of weeks, so I am so excited to have him on the show again this week. And then our final guest is Josh Saleh. Josh is a professional host. He's an actor, a gamer, and a dog dad, and he hosts content for Marvel Entertainment and Disney and Amazon and Microsoft and UMG and Adorama and so much more. I guess what he's best known for is hosting Marvel's Let's Play, where he interviews and plays along with different Marvel talent and game developers and fans. His Marvel hosting background also includes movie premieres. He was actually there at the Spider-Man No Way Home premiere, interviewing people on the red carpet. But before that started, he was kind enough to come out and say hi to Sam and BB Nate and I. He also does interviews at Marvel gaming tournaments and numerous Comic-Con panels, and he hosts things like Marvel Minute. When he's not nerding out about Marvel, you can catch him on Amazon as their tech and gaming host, and then he hosts a weekly video game news show with Adorama on the Citizen app. And he's an actor too. He's performed in short films and independent feature films and commercials and web series. And the coolest part about this is that he's a Star Wars fan, but he's not a Star Wars super fan. And so I wanted to get him on the show for his opinion. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Hanging out for about an hour with these three guys was so much fun. They've got some very interesting and different takes on the finale of the Book of Boba Fett, and their different perspectives are going to make this a very interesting episode for you to listen to. Go ahead and take a listen. All right, let's get into some real conversations about this now that we all got that out of our system with it. I was predicting, Pete and I were on Twitter Spaces even on Wednesday or Tuesday evening talking about this, and I was predicting, crazy things where Luke Skywalker had a lightsaber standing next to Boba Fett with Chewbacca and Han Solo and Black Chrysanthemum standing next to him, and Kira was on the other side, and this was a big endgame level battle, and none of that happened. But that's okay, because Star Wars is still fun when you don't get your expectations met. So let's start with you, Josh. What was your biggest surprise in the finale of the Book of Boba Fett?
Yeah, I guess my biggest surprise was I didn't think it was going to be a full hour of nonstop action. I didn't mind that. I actually really enjoyed it. But I guess my expectations were going to be they were going to maybe tie up some loose ends, maybe have some more dialogue, because the dialogue in this show is incredible. But the fact that I think a lot of fans were kind of waiting for more action, this was like, here you go. This is exactly what you're waiting for. The end of this culmination of this big battle in Tatooine.
Awesome. Yeah, it didn't stop. You didn't have a chance to kind of take a breath from the second. The slowest part of that was when they were sitting there in the sanctuary trying to figure out what was going to happen next. After that, everything was just full on the rest of the way. What about you, Pete? What was your biggest surprise in the finale?
I think my biggest surprise was that there was no big surprise, to be honest with you. I think, and it's one of the key lessons I learned from this, and I think I should have learned from The Last Jedi and from The Rise of Skywalker, that the story in my head is not what I'm going to get. And so, quite honestly, the first time around, I was underwhelmed. Second time around, when I knew what I was getting, much like Last Jedi, I loved it. And so I think the biggest surprise to me was that there was no big reveal. There was no sort of surprise big cameo, which of course it didn't need after all this time and all the cameos that we'd gotten the previous 2 weeks. But ultimately, it was a ton of fun. But I was surprised that I didn't have anything to go worry about not tweeting.
Right. Yeah. I woke up and I got up pretty early yesterday morning to watch it, and I wanted to check to see how long it was because I knew I needed to get Sam and Nate up before Sam had to leave to go to college. And so we needed to know how long we had to watch it before that. And I got on Twitter with a lot of trepidation, waiting for all the spoilers, and I didn't see much happening on Twitter with it. And I was a little bit concerned with it. But definitely the headcanon went out the window with this one. And you just got a really fun hour-long story. And it did tie up a lot of the loose ends with the season. It brought the characters back. It made sense of some of the plot lines that we got earlier in the season. And there was a lot of fun with some of those surprises. What about you, Lucas? What was your biggest surprise in the finale?
But I think the biggest surprise for me was that Cad Bane died.
Yeah.
That when, he was a character that watching the Clone Wars that I became incredibly attached to, and then playing several of the Star Wars board games or like the stuff that Fantasy Flight has made. He's a big player in some of that and has become a really incredible character to get to play as. And now he's gone. Like, I get that he was old for a Duros, but that's kind of weird. So, to have somebody that was such an important character now all of a sudden just completely disappeared.
Yeah, and bringing him into live action in Chapter 6 at the very end, only to kill him off in Chapter 7, is definitely a bold move by Robert Rodriguez and Dave, of course, and John as they were putting this together. And I'm sure that I can imagine that may have been a hard conversation for Dave to have, because Dave was so intimately involved with this character in the Clone Wars, and he's working with him in in Bad Batch as well. He's made appearances there, so bringing him in and then killing him off in live action was definitely a real big challenge on that. One of the things that I remember happening in Star Wars in the Twitterverse after The Last Jedi was this hashtag missed opportunities. And that was sort of sent into hyperspace by Mark Hamill when he talked about he tweeted a picture of him and Harrison and Carrie on the Millennium Falcon, and then talked about missed opportunities. And so that's become sort of a thing that happens in Star Wars. You have these moments where you think something's going to happen and you could have done it and it didn't happen. What was the biggest missed opportunity in the finale from your perspective? Let's start with you, Lucas. We'll go back to you.
Man, the biggest missed opportunity for me is that I don't feel like we got a tie into the Ahsoka series. Now, I know that we trust Dave and John, and they've done a great job telling the story for years now at this point, but I really do think that that's the biggest thing. I wanted to see something where we had some sort of Thrawn tie-in, and I've got some theories about maybe what Cad Bane might be doing with that, or where the Empire and the Syndicate might be working together, but I wanted to see something that's going to get me excited about the Ahsoka series, and I didn't get that other than a great cameo in episode 5 or 6.
All right, so you've got to, if you're throwing Thrawn and Ahsoka theories into with Cad Bane here, I got to hear like the Cliff Notes version of this theory really quick. Go for it, Lucas.
Yeah, so the Cliff Notes version would be, any of us who are Thrawn fans know that he's likely still alive. He's probably running with Sloane. He's probably running a good portion of the Empire. Well, if you look at Cad Bane is wearing Imperial ranks underneath his jacket. And at the end of the episode, whenever Boba kills him, if you look on the left side of that vest, there's a signal that goes off, and you can see in the subtitles that it's beeping. And if you watch it, there is a red signal that starts going off as soon as Cad Bane dies. So the theories are that this is not something that has to do with his life support system that's coming through his neck, but rather that it just sent a signal to somebody that let them know that, hey, you've got an officer down.
Wow.
Okay.
That's going to give us some things to talk about in the episode coming up next week with Sam and Nate, because I'm going to pick your brain on that one a lot more, Lucas. What about you, Josh? Go ahead. Missed opportunities in the finale.
I don't think I felt a missed opportunity, honestly. I guess the only missed opportunity was I felt maybe the robot action sequence went on a tad too long. Like it felt like, okay, I feel like we're not playing at the top of our intelligence here. We're just all running down alleyways, trying to run away from blasters when we could be hiding inside buildings. So, I don't feel like it was a missed opportunity, but it was just interesting to see that, okay, this is a longer fight scene than I was anticipating. Maybe you could have had more fun with the way, and then until the Rancor came in, I was like, okay, cool. Now I see where this is going.
yeah. That Rancors taking on giant droidicas that were, I guess those were concept art from the Attack of the Clones preparation that they changed in that and made different for Attack of the Clones, but they brought them back in this, so that was kind of cool with it. What about you, Pete? Missed opportunities in finale.
I think the only real missed opportunity, again, it's funny, having watched it twice, once on my own at 4:30 in the morning and once at 7 at night with my 9-year-old son. It was like watching two different shows, to be honest with you. But the one thing that I think was missed for me was the bringing to life the relationship between Boba and Cad Bane, because I can't say we all, but anybody who watches Clone Wars is familiar with that story, that he trained him so that he could be better than him, or Cad Bane trained him so that he could one day beat him. And that was what this came down to. So as a Clone Wars fan and a follower of those stories, it was powerful. To the average viewer, I think it's just that bad guy who showed up last week was beaten by our hero, which may work for people who are common fans. But the other piece of missed opportunity, I guess, broadly speaking, missed opportunities were things from Boba's childhood, because clearly it felt like they were trying to set something up when they would go back to Kamino so that you could see him watching Jango leave on his ship and he was left alone. And so in hindsight, that's clearly trying to make that connection to wanting a family and wanting connection. And that's great. But there was that opportunity to make that connection. Is it a failure? No, it's just, as you said, a missed opportunity. And it would have been kind of cool to show maybe that in a flashback, even if you didn't see Cad Bane, if you saw, those recognizable boots and hear that voice, maybe showing him how to shoot or something like that, it might have tied that together and made that last battle more powerful for the average viewer. Again, to me, I loved it because I knew where it came from. So it was exciting.
It's funny, I remember before the sequel trilogy started to release, the rule within Star Wars was that Star Wars doesn't do flashbacks, that you don't see those in film, you don't see those in anything going on. And then we saw some of that in the sequel trilogy films, of course, especially with The Last Jedi. We saw some flashbacks starting to happen there. And we've seen it in The Mandalorian some, and we saw it a lot in the book of Boba Fett. It's interesting. Maybe if they continue this on, they did disclose that this is the end of the season finale. They didn't call it the series finale of the book of Boba Fett, which would lead one to believe that they intend to do more potentially in the future with the book of Boba Fett. We can hope for that. Maybe we see some of those flashbacks in the book of Boba Fett in season 2, where you get more of the relationship between Cad Bane as they uncover that. That could be the master plan that John and Dave have put in place for that. Let's talk a little bit more about Boba Fett, because, at the end of chapter 6, one of the funniest things that I saw going around social media was actually, I think it was originally put out by our friend Stephen Kent, who wrote How the Force Can Fix the World. And he's been on the show as well. And he tweeted out, he's like, you can't be more on brand than to see Boba Fett without a line for 45 seconds than that. And so Boba Fett has changed a lot over the course of the book of Boba Fett. We've seen more of Boba Fett in this than we've ever dreamed of that. So let's start with you, Pete. How has, from your perspective, how has Boba Fett changed as a character because of this series?
As a character, he's always been mysterious. So it's kind of hard to say how much he's changed, other than that we know more about him, right? And so it's an interesting perspective. But one of the things I was thinking about when we were talking about doing this conversation was, in a way, and I may be in the minority here, but I still have this weird juxtaposition between Anakin and Vader, right? As much as I love Vader and Anakin and I see the connection, I still don't necessarily see Hayden Christensen under the helmet necessarily, right? If that makes sense. And the same thing here. It feels like a variation of Boba Fett. It feels like the character has grown, which is fantastic, but I'm not sure that it was truly Boba Fett. I don't know if that makes sense, because what I'm trying to say is that it's the character evolved, but from nothing I knew, right? So all we knew is that ultimately all you know about Boba Fett is that he fell into the Sarlacc pit at the end of, or at the beginning of Return of the Jedi. To see this character change, I will say that I have a lot more compassion for him as a character. I have a lot more interest in learning more about that time he spent on Kamino, that time in between when he was abandoned, when his father was murdered, and what goes into that. I guess ultimately what I got from this is I want to know more about that story before what we got, not necessarily so much the story we got.
It is weird to think about going back and watching the original trilogy and seeing, Boba Fett there in Empire and in Return of the Jedi, and thinking that this is the same character, and really at the same almost timeline with this, because we pick up right at Return of the Jedi with the storyline in the book of Boba Fett. It would be an interesting exercise to go back and watch those two movies and then pick up with the book of Boba Fett and watch that in a marathon and kind of see what that feels like with it. What about you, Lucas? How has Boba Fett changed because of the series?
Well, so it's interesting that you say that, because my wife and I watched Empire and Return of the Jedi before we watched the first episode of the Book of Boba Fett to kind of set that up. And one of the other things that we did is we went back and watched the Clone Wars episodes that specifically had Boba in it. I think the biggest change in Boba, now he mentions in this episode, I've gotten older, and that's why I've gotten soft in that exchange he has with Cad Bane at the beginning. But I think the biggest thing for Boba is that he finally found in the Tusken Raiders what he was always looking for, and that was family. When he's growing up and his father dies in episode 2, that it's a pivotal moment for him. And then even throughout, the Clone Wars series, whenever he's with the bounty hunters, they always they don't really care for him. They just see him as a way to help them get the things that they want. He is really just a really talented tool for them to be able to achieve, their own ends. And in the Tusken Raiders, he finally found some people that not only saw that he was talented, but that really towards the end of it cared for him, accepted him into it. Then Boba finally found his family. So I think the biggest change in Boba is that his value system has been completely adjusted after he found a family.
Yeah, I mean, it was early on, even before the series released, with the trailers, and we kept hearing Boba Fett talking about ruling with honor. It felt confusing and not like it didn't fit. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'm watching that trailer and he says, he's confronting, I don't even remember who it was in the end that he was confronting at this point, but he's confronting them in Jabba's throne room. And he's saying, I'm going to rule with honor. And that guy's standing right over the pit where the rancor is or was in Return of the Jedi. And I'm like, sure you are, Boba Fett. You're ruling with honor. I'm ready for the episode to play and that floor to go out from underneath him. And it kind of did, but it was in a different way than I anticipated it playing out. So it's definitely been a transition as far as that character goes. What about you, Josh? What are some ways that you think that Boba Fett has changed as a result of this show?
It's really interesting. I feel like Disney has done a lot of this recently, trying to make villains and make them compassionate and likable. We see that with Cruella, with that movie. And the only thing I knew about Boba Fett watching the previous Star Wars movies was he's a stone cold assassin and he's not going to take no for an answer. He will get his way. So I learned so much. I mean, we all did during this show. And I think, you were totally right. It was Lucas. Lucas, you were totally right in saying that his family, that became a new value for him. The Tusken tribe brought him in, right? And they did not know who he was, what he was doing. They used him as a slave, basically, trying to get water from the desert. And because he protected one of the tribe members' kids, he was now brought into their world. And here he is as someone, a stranger in the desert, like one of the chapters called, finally accepted and taught their ways. And I think he's never felt that before. I think he's never been entrusted with compassion, entrusted with the knowledge of somebody else's world. And that kind of showed him the way to understand that you need to have a tribe. You need to have a group of people helping you out, because he's been betrayed his entire life. Every person who's hired him, every person who's worked with him has only done it for money or to get ahead of someone else. He's never just had a group of people that cared for others. So I think that's where we really see it throughout the series, where he's bringing in Fennec. He sees someone wounded in the desert. The first thing he does is try and heal her. That to me, that's not Boba Fett. I mean, back in the Star Wars days, he would have taken all of the money or weapons on her and left and sold them for parts, probably. But the fact that immediately he sees someone hurt, his first instinct is now to heal that person. That was shocking to me. And then what was the crazy part is Jabba the Hutt's, I don't know their name, but the two green warriors.
The Gamorrean guards.
He was like, let's be a team. I was like, are you serious? Like, that's wild to me because of the past that they've had. So it to me, it was like, here's a new character. Here's a new Boba Fett that doesn't care about his past conflict. Here's a Boba Fett that is really trying to give everyone a second chance that he got. He got a second chance multiple times in the show, in the Sarlacc pit, now with the Tuskens. And he now sees that people can change like he has. So that compassion that he has brought forth makes him stronger as a character.
You know, Josh, hearing you say that kind of reinforces to me one of the things that I was thinking about, the role that Cad Bane plays. And again, to those that don't know the backstory, that's fine. But the role that he plays, for anybody who watches it, he had 3 very key lines, which were reiterated almost word for word by people who took issue with the show on social media. They said Boba Fett is a cold-blooded killer who worked for the Empire, right? And that's what everybody's like, this isn't Boba Fett. He's a cold-blooded killer who worked for the Empire. Cad Bane tells him you're just a killer at the end, right? Sort of that one-dimensional character. And then the other thing that I loved, and it almost felt like they were responding to social media commentary. I know they weren't, but when he says, "You've gone soft," which I thought was great, because that's what everybody, even if you love the show, you were kind of thinking like, what happened to this guy? Like, what's gone on? And just the way he was able to position it. And so to me, that's what Cad Bane was. Cad Bane was kind of representing the old school perception of Boba. And again, I had said it, I think on one of my shows at one point, that, reputation is not necessarily what you did, but what people think you did. And so while all of the Boba Fett stories that have gone into building this want to see this character, most of them are in the Legends portion of the Star Wars universe. So they may or may not have ever happened, but the fact that people think they did is enough to make Boba Fett the badass that people want him to be.
Yeah.
Well, it's also interesting. Boba's story is almost the exact opposite of Luke's story in the last trilogy that we saw, right? Luke was incredibly, incredibly good, always doing the moral correct thing. And then as soon as he has a second of thinking of the dark side, when it comes to Han's son, Ben, the entire Twitterverse reacted crazy. Like, how could you? He can't have another side to him. Like, what are you doing? Like, this character is the angel of Star Wars. But we can do that with Boba Fett, and everyone's okay with it. So it's interesting, that dichotomy.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because Pete, as you were sharing there, that made me think of moments within specifically The Last Jedi where it felt like they scripted lines in response to what they anticipated the fan reaction was going to be. This is not going to go the way that you think. Let go of the past. Kill it if you have to. Some of those lines from The Last Jedi felt like they were speaking to Star Wars fans who couldn't let go of Legends. And there's some of that even in this. And I just want to stop and say how cool it is to have Josh on here, because Josh is a Marvel guy, right? And so we've got somebody on here talking Book of Boba Fett that's like, who are those green pig guys? No, I mean, that brings so much joy to my heart. That was why I invited Josh on, was because I wanted that. That might have been my favorite moment of the entire conversation, because it illustrates something that I'm afraid we too often forget. Most of the people who watched the Book of Boba Fett aren't the types of people listening to Star Wars podcasts and watching countless hours of breakdown videos on YouTube or reading sensational deep dive articles online. They actually have lives outside of Star Wars. I know it's hard to believe. They don't know who Cad Bane was before he showed up in Chapter 6. Cobb Vanth isn't a character brought into live action from the Aftermath novels by Chuck Wendig. He's just the Marshal from the first episode of Season 2 of The Mandalorian. And whenever I have a conversation with one of these average Joes who watched this series, I find that they pretty much love every part of it. Star Wars isn't going to endure by trying to cater to the superfans like me and you. Star Wars will live on by telling stories that grabs the attention of 12-year-olds while entertaining their parents and their grandparents. And my gut is that this is exactly what the Book of Boba Fett did. Having said that, though, you are listening to a Star Wars podcast, so that means that you're a crazy super fan like me. And so I want to take just a minute to encourage you to check out our sponsor, Cufflinks.com. If you're not familiar with Cufflinks.com, all you need to know is that they have over 3,000 items, including cufflinks, ties, tie bars, and socks from all of the fandoms that you love, like Star Wars, of course, Star Trek, Marvel, for Josh, DC, Lord of the Rings, and more. We love Cufflinks.com. Cufflinks. I like coffee. But anyway, we love Cufflinks.com because they're family owned. They're run by a couple of brothers who geek out about Star Wars. They love the Book of Boba Fett as much as we do. So if you want to help this show out and you want to look great doing it, if you want to become a sharp-dressed fan, then head on over to Cufflinks.com. Take a look at everything it has to offer and make sure that you use the code Tatooine15 at checkout to receive 15% off of your entire order. All right, after digging into some more nuanced analysis of the finale of the Book of Boba Fett before this, it was now time to freak out for a few minutes about the best part of the whole episode. let's kind of put aside our adult hats for a minute, and we're going to talk a little bit about Star Wars and Boba Fett and the character development and Cad Bane and all of this. Can we just talk for a couple of minutes? You just go, have fun with it. I'm going to start with you, Pete. Boba Fett riding a Rancor, having a monster battle with these massive droidicas. Go. Just what was that like for you?
I mean, that was kind of what I loved about that. There's so many things I loved about it. First of all, it looked amazing. It looked, usually you see a character on the back of a beast and it looks a little strange. I don't know how they did it, but this one looked great top to bottom. But it struck me during that time because I just had a conversation with Dan Casey from Nerdist, and we were talking about how Star Wars is literally everything from magicians to philosophy to monster movies to magic. And I usually don't think about Star Wars as monsters for whatever reason, even though they're in every freaking thing we see from Star Wars. But this was like, it was like kaiju. It was like Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. It was so great. It was just, and again, the second time I watched it, I enjoyed it more because I was sitting with my son who was like oohing and eyeing, and I didn't have to be quiet because it wasn't 4:30 in the morning, and we were just loving it. And it was just this great full on comic book style action scene that I think everybody who loves Star Wars wants to see. That regardless of why you go to Star Wars, that's the kind of scene that you kind of have in your head at some point that you want to see. And it was really, really well done, right up to the King Kong reference when he's climbing up the tower. And it was so great. I really, again, taking off the adult hat, pure joy watching that, which is what Star Wars should be, right? So
yeah, absolutely. What about you, Lucas?
I mean, for the longest time, we've wanted to see the Rancor do something other than die in a pit. And we've seen it, in some video games, and we've seen it in a couple of the shows just kind of off to the side. There's, I think, a Rebels episode where there's a baby Rancor that, they're having to help out. And this was just absolutely amazing. Watching Boba come in on it, with the snout ring, having the reins attached to it, and he's actually controlling it, and it makes sense. Whenever Boba flies off and says he's going to get reinforcements, it could be anybody. Part of you thinks that now that the big reveal is maybe it's the Tusken Raiders, and then he comes back riding a Rancor. It fits this sort of like Western motif that they have, like to a T, is that the hero comes back on his noble steed, but his noble steed has, he's 5 stories tall and has giant claws. So I loved that about it. I got so stressed watching the Rancor, though, as soon as the droids started fighting back. He got shot in the chest the first time, and I was like, don't kill somebody else, right? Like,
you actually cared about the Rancor.
Yeah, like keep Timothy Oliphant dead, like save this guy. So like the Rancor's getting shot, and like my wife is looking at me, she's like, honey, you're getting way too into this. I was like, if they kill that Rancor, that's going to be the most upsetting thing to me in the whole episode.
And just so cross the line you can't get back from.
100% agree.
Oh yeah, like he was incredible. And then he's like, he's beating down the shield and he's ripping its arms off, and then all of the finally he gets away, and then as Pete mentioned, he's climbing up the tower, and it's so like nearly shot for shot Godzilla, and they're firing guns at him, and Mando says something, or sorry, King Kong, not Godzilla. Then Mando says something from the King Kong movies of like, stop it, you're scaring him, and like sure enough, and so then I'll have to stop. Like every part of that to me, I was screaming at the mods as well, like quit shooting the Rancor, he nearly just saved your skins, you still need him. And so it was my favorite part of the episode, but also the part that had me the most stressed out for the Rancor's safety. Save the cute Rancor.
That's awesome. What about you, Josh?
I 100% agree with Lucas. I did not want that Rancor to die. I would have been like, what are you doing? I thought it was epic when Boba Fett went to go get extra troops. I was like, who is he going to get? And then he comes on barreling with the Rancor. My favorite part of the show was when the robots come in for the first time. He's like, oh, they're destroying the city. No. And then he brings a Rancor in, which destroys more of the city than the robots do.
Yeah, it's like the New Republic is going to have to initiate the Sokovia Accords to deal with all the destruction from Boba Fett in the series with it.
I loved how, because after he destroyed the robots, I was like, okay, well, the Rancor is just not going to go back to its cage. Like, something's going to happen. I loved how they actually did that. Where, okay, now the Rancor is going to destroy everything, going to be a beast in the wild and not know anything what's going on. They've been in captivity their entire lives, so I really enjoyed that. And then I love how Grogu saved the day. Pretty much, it was just like, no, we sleep now. Go to sleep. We've done enough. Was
there ever a moment where you were concerned about Grogu's safety in that? I mean, you kind of know they can't do anything to their. I mean, come on. I mean, let's just be honest. Let's go put our adult hats back on. That's their cash cow. With Grogu right now, they're not going to kill him off. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, come on now. Let's be careful here. All right.
Yeah,
I love when Grogu was like trying to do the Force on the robot, and all he brought out was a screw. Right. I was like, okay, it makes sense because that's the weak part of the robot. But like, what is Grogu going to do right now?
It also shows how much smarter Grogu is than we think. Yeah. Because that makes perfect sense. It works. It works with it. Okay, let's talk about that mid-credit scene because at the end of chapter 6, we see that when Cad Bane is first introduced into the story, that great showdown with Cobb Vanth and his deputy, where the Bob Marley memes have been amazing over the last week. He shot the sheriff and shot the deputy. With that, it was pretty. It felt, at least on our end, from a Tatooine Sons perspective, it felt pretty clear that the deputy was taken care of in a pretty permanent way, but Cobb Vanth likely survived with a shoulder shot with that. And then we get to this mid-credit scene where it's funny because, earlier, but at the conclusion of the episode, Boba Fett seems to suggest that Black Chrysanthemum is going to be the one that's going into the bacta tank. And so he says someone's using the bacta tank, and you kind of assume that's going to be him. But then we see Black Chrysanthemum in the curtain call, essentially of the season at the end there. And then we go in there and we see Cobb Vanth laying there in the bacta tank. And then I don't remember the character's name because I just, I just don't remember it. But anyway, the character from the mods, the cyber mods gang, standing there. And I just want to go on record and say that one of us on Tatooine Sons, on our Predictions Sure to Go Wrong episode, said that Cobb Vanth was going to be put into the bacta tank and survive. And another one of us on our show said that he was going to get modded. So we're both correct with this. If you don't listen to our Predictions Sure to Go Wrong show, you miss things like that. But anyway, what did you guys think about that? And where do you think this is going to go? Let's start with Josh.
So yeah, a Cobb Vanth bacta tank. I think it's the same modder from that healed Fennec, actually, which is really cool. Yep. Yeah, which is awesome. Honestly, I have read a lot of theories online that Cobb Vanth might become a Sith Lord or something. That's something in the nethers of the world. I don't know if that's true or not. I read some weird Reddit forums yesterday.
Mike Zero coming to bring it in here. All right, we got. No, I'm just picking on you.
I have no idea who Cobb Vanth could become in the comics or in the shows or in the lore of Star Wars, but he's being healed apparently. So I would imagine he's going to have a bigger role if they do a season 2, or could he have his own spin-off show? I feel like that's not going to happen, but anything is possible. Now, yeah, I mean, my honest reaction is he's being healed. Cool. Let's see more of him.
Awesome. Pete, it's funny because you and I are big Aftermath book fans. We love that series of novels, and that's where we were introduced to Cobb Vanth. So I was pretty bummed when he was laying there on the streets of Freetown. And we weren't 100% sure what was going on. What did you think about the post-credit scene or the mid-credit scene and where that goes?
Yeah, I think it was pretty well set up. I was actually surprised that they said that, or that they even let us think he died, because I felt like there's no way he died. But anyway, because that's the second time that we've seen Cad Bane shoot somebody in the shoulder just to knock him down and not to kill him. But what was interesting to me was as they were walking down the street, Boba and Fennec, he said, "This isn't the life for us," or something like that, or who will do it? And she said, "Well, who will take it, or who will do it?" And so I feel like that's the setup, so that Boba leaves world, joins the bigger story again, and leaves Mos Eisley and Tatooine in the hands of the Marshal. And I think it's a nice way to do it. If we never see the Marshal again, like Josh, be disappointed, but I get it. He's played his part. But it was a nice sort of setup because I think, when you think of sort of pure of heart characters, the Marshal has shown that everywhere, every time he's been on screen. He's about saving his people. He's doing what's right for his town. And that's exactly what Boba wants to do. And so I think it's a good handoff there.
That's a really good point on that. And I do think that BB Nate's theory that Boba Fett becomes the Nick Fury of the Mandoverse, which is the one that's kind of constantly bringing the crews together for these big missions, which is sort of what ends up happening in this series. That applies better to Boba Fett than becoming the ruler of Tatooine. And he seems to be acknowledging that, like you're saying there in that finale at the end of the episode with Fennec Shand. So I do like the idea of Cobb Vanth, the Marshal, taking kind of rulership over Tatooine and doing it from a perspective of honor, which would tie into what Boba Fett wants to see happening, but also he's got a better reputation as a leader on there, and he's got the people of Freetown already supporting him with that. What do you think about the mid-credit scene, Lucas?
Man, I might have the unpopular opinion here on the show. I think he should have died.
Oh no!
I really like, as cool as I think the character of Cobb Vanth is, as much as I liked the Aftermath trilogy, and as much as I think Timothy Olyphant was a brilliant actor in that role, I'm almost a little disappointed that they're bringing him back, because there doesn't feel like in this particular series that there was any real sense of loss that moves the stories on. And he was one of those that, he crossed over series. We got to see a lot of his character, and you felt that in the last episode, in episode 6, that you were sad that he went, but it motivated, the people of Freetown to be there. It gave them a reason to be at that last battle. And now I don't know that it completely negates that, but I do think it does open up the door, like Pete said, to allow Boba to get off world, to do a little bit more with everything else in the Mandoverse, which is great. And I do think Oliphant's a great character, but I almost wish they would have just let him die.
Wow, going brutal on us, Lucas. Yeah. There you go. Yeah. All right. Jeez, man. I mean, I was just excited that he showed up again and that he survived, because next weekend is Pensacon in Pensacola, and we were debating whether or not I was going to try to cosplay as Cobb Vanth, and so it's like, oh well, he survived, so now we kind of feel like we have to. We made all these plans last night to do that, so I'll have to send. I'll send you guys pictures of it. It'll be interesting for sure.
Gotta see that.
All right, let's go back to Cad Bane, because we talked about him, and we talked about the character, and we talked about his death in this, and a little bit about how at least I mentioned how surprised that was. Overall, we'll start with you, Lucas. Was Cad Bane a wasted character in this series?
No, I think Cad Bane was he was poetic. If you watch the other series, if you've got the relationship with Cad Bane especially from the Clone Wars, then the way that he went out is very poetic, and it does help the character of Boba Fett. I also think it sets him up to be a player in the Kenobi series, because the Kenobi series is going to happen before this, and I think Cad Bane's going to have a spot in the Kenobi series, and so I think we're going to see more of him. But I think knowing how his story ends, that it's at the hands of Boba Fett, I think is really cool and very poetic in that whole theme. So I don't think he was a wasted character. I think we're going to see more of him.
Awesome. What about you, Josh?
I would be shocked if we don't see more of him. I think he's still alive. That beeping on his chest, I thought it was like a life support, but what you brought up, saying it could be a transmitter to someone else, that's a really interesting concept that I didn't even think about. So I'd be shocked if we don't either see him in shows that are coming up, like the Kenobi series, or we don't see him come back in a certain way. But I don't think he was wasted. And I have another question after we obviously go to Pete. So Pete, go first, and I have a question for you guys about that.
Go, Pete.
No, I gave my thoughts on his use. I think he was great. I think to the point that you were making about he will be back. We definitely will see him again. You don't, just like Chrysanthemum, who I think we'll also see in the Obi-Wan series or somewhere, because you don't make a costume like that. You don't put that kind of effort into something you're going to use on screen just for a couple minutes. So, but no, I don't think he was wasted. I'm looking forward to speaking to people who weren't deep into the stories like I am, like my dad, who I always talk to at this. He's the one who thought, oh, that Ahsoka character, she's pretty cool. And I was like, you have no idea how cool she is. And got to tell him, her backstory. Same thing with Cad Bane. So I'm curious to see how people respond to him as sort of the man in black of this series without knowing the backstory. But I don't think he was wasted. And I too think he'll be back in one form or another.
All right, what about Josh? Go for it. What's your question?
Yeah, I had no idea what his backstory was either, so I loved it. So, okay, if people that think he was wasted, I know we all don't, do you all think Darth Maul was wasted?
It's a great question. As a Star Wars super fan going all the way back to the Phantom Menace, that was the big complaint after the Phantom Menace. And really almost throughout the prequel trilogy, he was like the coolest character in the prequels, and he dies at the end of the first episode, and he kind of gets the Boba Fett treatment in that trilogy.
Josh, you and I are going to have to talk, because Darth Maul is the reason why I wrote my 120,000 word fan fiction novelization of the Phantom Menace, because I always felt, by the way, oh, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
It always felt to me like he was the most wasted character, perhaps not just in Star Wars, but in any movie ever. I mean, he was the face of the prequels, or at least the return of Star Wars. And he had 2 lines in the movie, but I love what they've done with him since. Again, and now when I hear somebody say that, because it's a great question for people who don't watch all that stuff, you need to go see his story, because he, to me, is the Joker of the Star Wars universe.
Wow. That's awesome. What do you think, Lucas?
Yeah, in 1999, when I was 13 years old and saw Darth Maul die, I immediately looked at my dad and went, "That sucked." Like, I was so upset, because he was the coolest thing, and like, you'd loved Darth Vader, and I thought that now I had this new Sith Lord that I was just going to be able to, I've got 2 younger brothers, that now I had a Sith Lord with a double-edged lightsaber. Like, I'm going to win every fight in our kitchen from here on out. And then they killed him at the end, and I was like, well, this is useless. So, yeah, I was really frustrated then, but now I'm like Pete. I love what they've done with the character, and I think that he may still have influence on what's happening in the future with the Syndicate and others, because he actually has a portion of his storyline where he's in control of all of that. So I think it'll be interesting to see how much his influence trickles down.
Yeah, absolutely. The idea that we could, they've brought Kira into the comics in such a significant way in the last year, from Solo, a Star Wars story, as the ruler of Crimson Dawn and connections with the bounty hunters, that so many people expected her to be the big villain, including us. That was one of our predictions, sure to go wrong, going all the way back to the beginning of the season. But the trailers, that was my thing, that Kira was coming as the big villain in this. She didn't happen. But the fact that they're bringing her into this, and there is that connection to Maul at the end of Solo, a Star Wars story, leads me to believe we're going to end up at some point getting more Maul. We're going to get that connection to Kira, and it probably will play into a season 2 of the Book of Boba Fett, if that's what we get. We talked a little bit about that earlier. They called this the season finale, not the series finale of this. So I'll start with you, Lucas. Are we getting a season 2 of the Book of Boba Fett? And if we are, speculate irresponsibly for just a minute. Where do you think the story goes?
Yeah, so I do think we're getting a season 2 of Boba Fett, and I think that this is going to kind of follow in the storyline that a lot of like gangster movies or really gangster series start with, that he had his run-in with the Pike Syndicate, that he beat them, and all that he's really done by beating them is he's put himself, on the most wanted list of whoever is controlling the Syndicate. And I think this actually pushes us closer to having a confrontation with Kira and with Crimson Dawn than what we were at before, because now they've taken out, Tatooine as a place where they can run spice. And so I think season 2 is going to explore that. And I think that's probably one of the other things that takes Boba off world, is now he's, placed himself, on the most wanted list of one of the biggest crime syndicates in the galaxy. I also think with this, we've opened up the possibility for Boba Fett to show up in a lot of these other series. And I think we're going to get some more backstory with Boba in Kenobi, that we'll see that potentially, that we'll see some stuff between Obi-Wan and Darth Maul there too, depending on where they go with that timeline and what all that includes. But it opens up the door for us to get a lot more backstory in, Boba Fett or of Boba Fett in series like Kenobi and potentially in Ahsoka and some other things. And what we've learned with the series, the Book of Boba Fett, is that Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau are not afraid of dedicating an episode or two to a character that's not in, that show, or that it's not focused on them, in order to further the greater storyline. So I think we see a lot more of Boba. I think we get a season 2, and I think the season 2 is about him and Kira.
Yeah, and I think you're right about what they are willing to do as far as dedicating these characters. I'm going to go ahead and go on record right here because, Kenobi, it releases May 25th on the 45th anniversary of the release of Star Wars. I'm going to go ahead and go on record and say that they're going to devote at least 2 episodes to Dexter from the diner in Attack of the Clones.
Absolutely.
And we're going to get his backstory, and then we'll switch back to Kenobi on that. Okay, Lucas, we got you. Let's go, Josh. Season 2, and if so, what do you think the story is?
I wouldn't be surprised if the next season of Mandalorian, they bring in parts of Book of Boba Fett, like what they did with this one. And maybe we might not get a second season of Book of Boba Fett because it kind of goes through the Mandalorian phase. But I also wouldn't be surprised either way. I mean, I think fan reactions where they absolutely loved the show, and it would be kind of not smart as an investment to not continue the storyline or not continue other spin-off stories with other characters like we see with Kenobi. I also wouldn't be shocked if you see other characters like Ahsoka, like you mentioned earlier, getting her own series because of that strong lore that she has connected to Star Wars. Now, if they go the approach where Star Wars fans get what they want, you can see like 100 series on Disney Plus with every single character that you love. You can see Admiral Akbar series. Why not? So, I mean, yeah.
Right. Well, and if you don't listen to our show, which, if people are listening to this show right now, but anyway, they may think that we're getting about 740 different series because Giant Freaking Robot has about 6 new announcements every single week. So anyway, we bring that up in our clickbait bad news segment. All right, Pete, bring some sanity to this. Do we get season 2? And if so, what do you think the story is?
I will say I don't think we get a season 2. I don't want a season 2. I think a story called Book of Boba Fett is a nice way to kind of insert his story there. It included 2 pages of Mandalorian story. I think we could get a Boba Fett story somewhere, but I like to think of the Book of Boba Fett sort of on the shelf. The shelf is this whole Mandalorian series, and there's the Book of Boba Fett. I'll pull that one out and read it. And there's the Book of Ahsoka, and there's the Knights of the New, or Rangers of the New Republic. But I think it's part of that thing that Kathleen Kennedy referenced November or December of last year, where she, or 2 years ago now, where she said that it's going to culminate in one series event. And I think this is the background. Now, as the other guys were saying, 100% think we're going to see Boba Fett pop up all over the place. He's going to be here and there. He's going to do a job here or there. He's going to be called on. We might even get 3-episode arc from him for in some other place. But that's my sense. I don't see another Book of Boba Fett. I'll happily be wrong, but I don't see it happening.
I just hope that in Kenobi that we have an episode where Kenobi goes into Jabba's throne room and has this big long sequence with Jabba the Hutt and Bib Fortuna and this big conversation. And all we get of Boba Fett is him standing in the corner. And that's all we get with him. If we do that, then I'm happy with that. All right, let's close it out with this one final question. You guys are not prepared for this. I didn't give this one to you ahead of time, but it's pretty easy. I'll start with you, Josh. On a scale of 1 to 10 falling Gamorreans, where do you rank? What is your rating of the entire season of the Book of Boba Fett?
I would give it 9 out of 10 Fallen Gamorreans. I think it's way up there in terms of series that I've seen. It kept me captivated. It made me want to watch more each week. I fell in love with new characters that I never knew about. And I think the most pivotal part of this last episode, which I forgot to mention, which actually was the most dark that I've ever seen Star Wars, was Fennec's assassination in that hut.
Yeah.
Hanging the mayor, I was whoa, I've never seen this in Star Wars before, but that made me kind of excited because I'm not 12. I don't know. It's a 12-year-old. I feel like I'd be horrified.
I'm just going to be honest with you. Playing in my backyard with Brandy and Marvin and Jamie, and we had our little Return of the Jedi action figures. There may have been some string involved. All right. And that's why the kids aren't on this episode. All right. Pete, 1 to 10 falling Gamorrean guards. How do you rate the season?
Overall, I'm going to put it at at 8 falling Gamorrean guards. It was there was, from a technical execution, directing wise, and some of the technicalities, the adult version of me had a couple misses, but not enough to make me dislike it. I loved it. It was, even more so than in some cases Mandalorian, and certainly more than Bad Batch. I was waking up very early to watch it and be prepared for it, and got excited about it every week. So yeah, I'll give it 8 falling green guys.
All right, Lucas, 1 to 10 Gamorrean guards screaming and squealing as they fall 2,000 feet from a cliff on Tatooine.
Yeah, I'm like right in the middle, because I'm going to give it an 8.5. So I'll give it 8 falling Gamorrean guards and 1 baby Grogu strutting in like a fancy gentleman. So
not Grogu.
That's
as long as he's not falling, right?
Yeah, he's not falling. That's kind of where I feel on it. I think it could be bumped up to a 9, depending on what they do with the rest of the universe, like how well this sets everything else up. Might make this series better for me than what it is, but I think a solid at 8.5. I loved it. It satiated my desire to see more of Boba Fett and to know his backstory, but it's really going to depend on where it goes and what they do with it from here on out.
That is fantastic. Thank you guys so much for spending the last hour or so nerding out, both as adults and as 12-year-olds, about the book.
Wait, what about you? What's your rating?
Oh, I'm going to have to save my rating for our main show that comes out on Tuesday, which will be out at 6 a.m. Eastern time on Tuesday.
Speak to the manager.
There we go.
That was a great setup, though, Josh. Well done.
Thank you. What an honor to get these thoughts and perspectives from Pete and Lucas and Josh. Make sure that you check out everything that they've got going on. Remember, Pete hosts Around the Galaxy, has multiple shows a week. Lucas is the Reverend from the Reverend and the Reprobate podcast, which has a lot more than just Star Wars conversation, including BB Nate. He was on an episode that released earlier this week, and he was talking about Batman, and they actually ranked Winnie the Pooh characters. I'm not sure how BB Nate did on that. But anyway, and then when Josh is interviewing Tom Holland and Jon Favreau on red carpet movie premieres, remember, he's hosting Marvel Let's Play while playing video games with all these Marvel personalities. So that's a ton of fun. I'll link to all of their relevant sites in the show notes. So please take time to learn about them, follow them on their socials, listen to their shows, watch their videos, and just support them as well. And thank you so much for listening to Tatooine Sons of Pop Culture Podcast. If you enjoyed this show, this first time thing for us, we've never done a panel review like this, please take a moment to rate and review the show on your podcast app of choice. Make sure you hit that follow or subscribe button on your app so you get every episode the moment it drops. Our next episode releases on Tuesday, like I mentioned at the end of the interview there. We're going to be getting Samuel the Hutt and BB Nate's reaction to the finale of the Book of Boba Fett. BB Nate is actually going to share a deep dive into the Court of Owls. Now, we really believe that this is going to play a major role in the Batman movie coming out in March, so you won't want to miss that. And then it looks like we're going to get a lot of new trailers during the Super Bowl. I'm not actually sure if I'm allowed to say that word without a copyright problem. But anyway, between that big football game that's coming this weekend, we'll spend some time breaking down all of those trailers as well. Make sure you follow the show. You don't want to miss an episode. While you're at it, follow Tatooine Sons on Facebook and Twitter and share this episode with somebody else. Just direct message it to them, text it to them, whatever. Help us get the word out about this show and these amazing guests that we had. It's the best way you can help us grow. That's going to do it for today. There's only one thing left to say.
May the Force be with you always.
This party's over.
I like that Wookiee.
Don't get technical with me.
Join, please.
Yep, yep.